Ray Stoddard, Stoddard. I am a Army infantry, U.S. Army infantry. Didn't intend to be in the infantry, but that was what they were all doing. First of all, I have 2 honorable discharges, one from the Navy and one from the Army. Very unusual. But after high school, which I graduated in 1942, I went out to I'm from Minneapolis, first of all. That was where I grew up, in Minneapolis. And I went out to, at that time it was the Chamberlain Airport, not an international airport, but there was adjacent to Fort Snelling. Anyways, I signed up and took a test for the Navy Air Corps. And was going to get my wings of gold. And I passed the test, and they then put me on hold. There were so many signing up that my group was told to go home and they'd call us, which I entered the University of Minnesota then and spent, I think it was like a quarter or 2 quarters, educating myself a little bit further. When they called us to go now, which was later, I think it was about, I'm pretty sure it was about 2 months before we got the call. A lot of the ones earlier were already past their 90 days, and were over. One of the boys, Jack Wood, was back home wounded before I even got the call. So, anyways, they gave me an eye test after and figuring it had taken a long time, and I flunked the eye test. And so they gave me the choice. I could go into the Navy or I could leave the Navy. So I decided maybe I can make it in Air Corps in the Army. And so I took the discharge from the Navy. So that's how I got I never served really, but I was on my way then. Draft board caught me 3 days that next week. In 3 days they caught me, and I was assigned to go out to Fort Snelling. So I've spent about a month and a half at Fort Snelling, living at home and also in the tar paper shacks that would now be a runway over the international airport there. And also, I was pretty excited. The Army was pretty nice. And I figured I should get Air Corps, but they didn't do anything on that. They just called me in, and I was put on a streetcar to St. Paul, and took the streetcar off the streetcar and got to into the train, and it was about 2.5 days to go down to Texas. And that's when I started my training on the anti-aircraft. And we fired Bofors 40 millimeters, which, by the way, they have one at Fort Sheridan on that park that goes down to the lake. at Fort Sheridan. They have a emplacement there of the Beauforts, so that I am always reminded of that. Okay, now I'm in the Army, and in my weekends I would go up and take tests for the Air Corps. Got notice that I passed everything, and that they were shipping me out to Shepherd Field, Wichita Falls, Texas, to be trained for Air Corps. So that's what I did. I left our AAAA and went to Shepherd Field, and I took tests to see what, besides physicals, which I passed on the eyes. I took tests, and one day when I was in the classroom, this major walked in, and he was waving a telegram, and he read it to us, and it's just a bunch of military talk. But he said, basically, gentlemen, what this means is from the ground forces back to the ground forces. So they shipped me back to Fort Bliss to join my outfit, which they then broke up and put us on a train and went to Camp Breckenridge, which is a little bit south of Evansville, Indiana, and which I could remember the name of the town now. Morganfield, I think it is. Anyways, it's just a little bit south in Kentucky, and that's where we had a very vigorous training for the 75th Division on October 16th, my birthday. We got the call to got on the train and ready to go overseas. And the first stop is Camp Shanks, which was in New Jersey, right on the Hudson River. We went down, a few days later, we went down to the docks right across from New York City, and entered the ship, and way down on the bottom of the ship, I guess it was, sleeping on 3 tiers of cots, and it was not a nice trip. We said goodbye to Statue of Liberty, and I didn't get up to see it, but some of the guys did get there. And we went over, we were in convoy, and it was constant. We were being escorted by some ships from the Navy who were dropping depth bombs along the way because they detected submarines. So it wasn't a pleasant trip at that. We went and we landed in Wales, Swansea, Wales, and was taken by truck to Nissen huts to train. And these Nissen, it was now November '44, and that was not too comfortable as far as weather. we got a few big lumps of coal to put into the heaters and trained a little bit more, mostly walking or hiking the roads. And I got a 3-day pass to go to London, which I thought was quite exciting. And I got on the train and was impressed with a memory of the train tracks were different than they are in the U.S. These train tracks went, when the train went on, it would go clickety, 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 clap, clickety, 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 clap. And that was what we had the whole time. When I got into London, I felt sick. So I thought, well, I'll go get one of those sulfa pills from the aid station. I went to the aid station and said what I needed. And there was a major, it was the only one in the aid station, and he took my temperature and so on, and he said, well, we're going to send you to the hospital. And I said, the hell, I'm not going to go to any hospital. He said, well, that's an order. And so that was my experience there. So they put me in an ambulance, and I went to this hospital. I don't know where it was in London, but that night, those V2s were coming in, and there was big explosions. And I thought, well, what in the hell am I doing here? Why don't I just leave? But they kept me in the hospital for about a week and a half, and I was in a ward of very wounded troop who had been over to the hedgerows. And they were telling me a little bit about that. Anyways, after all this time in the hospital, I finally got a release. And so the hospital to release me sent me to the 10th replacement depot, which were in some camp. And I had to go up there. It was called the 10th Repel Depot, and we got a sign that said, "We're sending you over to France." And I said, "Well, no, my outfit hasn't left yet." They said, "That doesn't make any difference. You're ours now up there." They were going to send me as a replacement, and my division is sitting here and now had moved to Southampton. So I asked the sergeant what I could do about it, and he said, "Go see the chaplain." And I went and saw the chaplain and spread a few tears about what my situation was. And the next day, I had the pass to go to Southampton to meet my old buddies at our Company F. And that's how I got and entered the war, anyways, as an infantryman, was right from the beginning. And the 75th Division was called the Diaper Division because the average age was about 22 years old, which is quite an accomplishment. We're the baby. Yeah. So that's how we went over and landed outside of Le Havre because most of the ships were bringing ammunition and supplies and to the Le Havre. And there's no room for us to do. So we went over on big, heavy rope nets over the railing, and we got into landing ships or boats or whatever you call them. And then from there we moved up to about 40 miles away from Le Havre in a very muddy and wet area, and that was the beginning of moving around. And by this time, when we moved up to this muddy area, the bulge hadn't started, but in about one day, we got word that the 106th Division had been overrun, and that the bulge was on. General Montgomery was our general, which didn't mean too much to me. You don't see generals that much. But this is because Montgomery was now part of, or controlling part of the U.S. Army. This was the thing about that had been maneuvered by General Eisenhower. So it was a kind of a sacrifice. We're now on with the British and attached to them. And then we were attached to also to the 2nd Cavalry Division of the U.S., we'd ride the tanks to crossroads to stop the Germans from coming into these different paths or highways. I didn't exactly have fear. I don't know what you call it. Once we got into battle, you become very alert, of course, to what's going on. When you get artillery fire, mortar fire, you just want to take care of yourself, that's all. The end of January, when we finally ended up closing the border again where the bulge was. So then our nickname was called the Bulge Busters, and that's the 75th Bulge Busters, not the Diaper Division anymore. No way. It took me until March 1946 when I finally landed in New York area. This time I saw the Statue of Liberty. I didn't know it. I was shell shocked, but I didn't know it. It lasted for a long time. But to come home, most of my friends were not in the infantry. I only knew one friend from our high school group that was in the infantry, and he was terribly hurt. But there's nobody else in the infantry, so it was kind of lonely there. As a matter of fact, it takes 11, they said somewhere along the way that it takes 11 other people to every one infantryman. And that's about true, I guess. It does take, you got the engineers, and you got the artillery, so there's just all kinds of other helpers there. Coming home, we were welcome, which impressed me. I think I remember there was somebody, there was a ship out in entry to New York City, and it said, "A job well done," in big letters. And of course, then they're still bringing them home. They're trying to, quite a job to get them all home. Within 1 week, I had gone over to the University of Minnesota and signed up to continue my education. It was a big mistake, because I didn't know. I have no ambition. Just all screwed up. Didn't know it. And didn't know where to go if I did know it. Wouldn't know it. So that's it took quite a while. Thanks to my now wife, Nancy. She didn't know it either. It's something comical, I think you might say. We were married and had an apartment at Lake Harriet in Minneapolis. And the first night, there was streetcar tracks were running in the backyard between that and the lake. And sound asleep after we moved in, and the streetcar came by, and apparently I thought it was incoming fire, and woke up and really scared of what was going on, just with the streetcar in the backyard of this apartment. Yeah. So I was still affected. That would be about 6 years after the war. Yeah, she was my child bride. The idea of the honor flight was to go to the World War II memorial and take that chance. But the memorial, when it was opened, Nancy and I got in the car and drove to see it in Washington. So I didn't think I needed the honor. I argued it, but my children, my daughters, insisted that I take it. So, okay, I went on the honor flight, and it was wonderful. I hadn't experienced anything like it. They have that mail call where they distributed all the letters from all the friends, which I still have saved, but is still in moving, still in my storage. And I think they were very accommodating, and the volunteers were wonderful to watch over us. And our flight, although it took a while to take off, it didn't take long to fly into Dulles airport and unload and get on buses and go directly down to the World War II memorial. But for me, it was essentially double, because the daughter of one of our squad leaders and a good friend that went through the war with me, the daughter, who lives in Bethesda, came down and greeted me when I'm getting off the bus. And I hadn't heard anything about it